You're really going to court over a car? I asked my sister when the lawsuit papers arrived. She didn't answer the question. She just smiled and said, "Dad wanted me to have it." That was the moment I realized this was never about the car. My name is Evelyn Parker. I'm 69 years old, and until a few weeks ago, I believed my older sister Diane and I would spend the rest of our lives sharing stories about our father instead of fighting over what he left behind. Our father, Robert Parker, passed away at 93 after a long and full life. The funeral had been simple, exactly the way he wanted it. Friends came, neighbors came, former co-workers came. People stood in line to tell stories about his kindness, his patience, and his habit of helping others without expecting anything in return. For a brief moment, standing beside Diane at the cemetery, I thought grief had brought us closer together. I was wrong. 3 weeks later, a certified envelope arrived in my mailbox. I remember standing in my kitchen holding it while the coffee maker hummed softly behind me. The return address belonged to a law firm downtown. At first, I assumed it was another document related to Dad's estate. There had been plenty of paperwork since his passing. Instead, it was a lawsuit. Diane was suing me for ownership of Dad's vintage Cadillac, a beautifully restored car valued at nearly $50,000. I read the pages twice because I thought I had misunderstood something. Surely this had to be a mistake. Dad's will had already been reviewed. The estate attorney had explained the distribution process. Yet here was my sister claiming the vehicle rightfully belonged to her and asking the court to intervene. My hands trembled slightly as I lowered the papers onto the kitchen table. Not because of the car, because of what the lawsuit represented. Dad had been gone less than a month. And we were already standing on opposite sides of a legal dispute. I called Diane that afternoon. She answered on the third ring. Her voice sounded calm, almost cheerful. "Did you receive the documents?" she asked. Not hello, not how are you holding up, just that. I told her I had. I asked why she was doing this. She said Dad had promised her the Cadillac years ago. I reminded her there was no record of that promise. She told me some promises mattered more than paperwork. Then she ended the call. That night, I sat alone in my living room staring at an old photograph of Dad standing beside that same Cadillac. He was smiling proudly, one hand resting on the hood. I could still hear his laugh when I looked at that picture. I could still remember summer drives through the countryside when I was a little girl. To me, the car represented memories. To Diane, it seemed to represent something else entirely. Over the next several days, strange details began piling up. Diane called the estate attorney repeatedly. She requested documents she had never shown interest in before. She contacted insurance representatives. She even spoke to one of Dad's former financial advisors. The more I learned, the less sense the lawsuit made. Why spend thousands of dollars fighting over a single vehicle? Why move so aggressively over one asset when the estate contained many others? Every answer created 2 new questions. Then, late one Friday afternoon, my phone rang. The caller ID displayed the name of Dad's attorney, Michael Sullivan. His voice sounded unusually serious. "Evelyn," he said, "there's something I think you need to know, and I believe your sister doesn't know it yet." In that moment, sitting alone in my quiet house with the lawsuit papers still spread across the table, I had the feeling that everything I thought I understood about my father's estate was about to change. For several seconds after Michael Sullivan spoke, I could not find the words to respond. I looked through the window above my kitchen sink and watched the evening sunlight settle across the backyard Dad used to help me maintain every spring. The silence stretched between us. Finally, I asked what he meant. Michael paused before answering. He said there were documents connected to my father that had not been discussed during the initial estate review because they were held separately from the assets listed in the primary file. His tone was careful, measured, as if he wanted to choose every word correctly. I felt my stomach tighten. Dad had always been organized. He kept records for everything. If there was another document, there had to be a reason. Michael asked if I could meet him at his office the following Monday morning. He did not want to discuss the details over the phone. Before ending the call, he said something that stayed with me all weekend. He said, "Your father planned further ahead than most people realized." After hanging up, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The lawsuit papers remained exactly where I had left them. For the first time, I stopped thinking about Diane's claim and started thinking about Dad. During the last few years of his life, he had become quieter. Not withdrawn, just more reflective. He spent long afternoons reading financial newspapers and reviewing folders in his home office. At the time, I assumed it was simply how he chose to spend his retirement. Now I wondered if something else had been happening. My thoughts drifted back to one conversation we shared about 6 months before he passed away. We had been sitting on his porch watching a summer storm move across the horizon. He asked me whether I believed money changed people. I remember laughing softly and saying it depended on the person. Dad shook his head and told me that money did not change people. It revealed them. At the time, I thought it was just another one of his thoughtful observations. Now those words felt different. Over the next 2 days, Diane became even more active. I learned from a mutual acquaintance that she had contacted several people connected to Dad's estate. She seemed determined to gather information as quickly as possible. The urgency puzzled me. Most families spend months settling an estate. Diane appeared unwilling to wait even a few weeks. On Sunday afternoon, I drove past Dad's old house. The property was empty. The curtains were drawn. The front porch looked exactly as it had the day we left after the funeral. I parked across the street and sat there for a while. Memories filled my mind. Birthday dinners, holiday gatherings, conversations that lasted late into the evening. It was difficult to reconcile those memories, with the tension now dividing our family. When Monday morning finally arrived, I drove downtown to Michael's office. The building stood near the courthouse, a quiet brick structure that had been there for decades. Michael greeted me personally and led me into a conference room. A thick folder rested on the polished wooden table. He sat across from me and folded his hands. His expression was serious but calm. Then he opened the folder and slid a document toward me. The first line contained my father's signature. The second line contained information I had never seen before. And as I began reading, I realized my sister had been chasing the wrong prize all along. My eyes moved slowly across the page as if reading too quickly might somehow change the words in front of me. The document had been signed nearly 8 years earlier. It established a separate financial arrangement that existed outside the assets we had discussed after Dad passed away. Michael remained silent while I read. He seemed to understand that I needed time. Dad had always been careful with money, but I never imagined he had been planning something this extensive for so many years. The document referenced investment accounts, trusts, and beneficiary designations that had been updated periodically. Every signature was his. Every date matched periods when he had quietly mentioned meeting with advisors. Suddenly, countless small memories began fitting together like pieces of a puzzle. I remembered evenings when he would excuse himself during family gatherings to take phone calls from financial institutions. I remembered seeing folders on his desk marked with names I did not recognize. At the time, none of it seemed important. Now it felt like evidence hidden in plain sight. Michael explained that Dad had worked with a financial advisor named Edward Grant for more than a decade. Together, they had created a long-term strategy designed to remain separate from the assets most people associated with his estate. According to Michael, Dad believed simplicity prevented conflict. He intentionally kept certain matters private because he feared family disagreements after his passing. Hearing that made me sad, not because he had been secretive, but because he had anticipated exactly what was happening. Michael slid another document across the table. This one contained a summary prepared by Edward. I scanned the figures carefully. My heart began beating faster. These were not small accounts. They represented years of disciplined investing and patient planning. The numbers were far larger than anything Diane seemed to be fighting over. I asked Michael whether Diane knew these accounts existed. He shook his head. As far as he knew, she did not. The answer immediately raised another question. If Diane was unaware of these assets, why was she behaving with such urgency? Why was she calling attorneys, insurance representatives, and anyone connected to Dad's affairs? Michael leaned back in his chair and admitted he had been asking himself the same thing. Then he told me something unexpected. A week before the lawsuit was filed, Diane had contacted his office repeatedly requesting access to records unrelated to the vehicle dispute. She appeared interested in locating documents rather than resolving ownership of the car. That detail stayed with me. The Cadillac suddenly felt less important than ever. It was beginning to look like a distraction. After our meeting ended, I drove home through downtown traffic with the documents locked securely in my briefcase. My mind replayed every interaction I had recently had with Diane. The short phone calls, the unusual questions, the impatience, the constant pressure to move faster. For the first time, I considered the possibility that she believed something valuable was hidden somewhere within Dad's records. Perhaps she had discovered a clue. Perhaps she was searching blindly. Either way, she was searching. That evening, I placed the documents on my dining room table and sat quietly beside them. Outside, the sun disappeared behind the trees. The house grew darker. The more I thought about Dad's careful planning, the more one question refused to leave my mind. If these accounts had been protected for years, what exactly had convinced Diane that she needed to start digging now? The next morning, I decided to stop guessing and start paying attention. Dad used to tell me that answers rarely appeared all at once. They revealed themselves through patterns. Looking back, I realized there had been a pattern developing for months before he passed away. At the time, I had been focused on helping him with appointments, errands, and daily responsibilities. Diane, on the other hand, had become unusually interested in paperwork. She frequently offered to organize files, sort records, and review old documents. I remembered one afternoon when I arrived at Dad's house unexpectedly and found several boxes spread across his dining room table. Diane immediately closed the folders she had been reading and changed the subject. The moment seemed insignificant then. Now it felt different. Later that week, I scheduled a meeting with Edward Grant. His office occupied the top floor of a modest building overlooking a small lake outside town. Edward had worked with Dad for years and greeted me warmly. After offering me coffee, he opened several files and began explaining how carefully Dad had structured his financial affairs. What surprised me most was not the amount of planning involved. It was the level of privacy. Dad had intentionally separated certain investments from the estate assets discussed with family members. According to Edward, he believed financial information should remain confidential until the proper time. Edward also shared something else. About 2 months before Dad passed away, Diane had called him seeking information. At first, she asked ordinary questions. Then the conversations became more specific. She wanted details about account structures, ownership designations, and historical transfers. Edward politely declined to provide information. Hearing this sent a chill through me. Diane had started searching long before the lawsuit. The vehicle dispute was not the beginning of her investigation. It was simply the first part one happened to see. As our meeting continued, Edward reviewed additional records. Several transactions showed routine account activity managed entirely according to Dad's instructions. Nothing appeared suspicious. Nothing suggested misconduct. Yet one detail stood out. Dad had updated beneficiary designations less than a year before his passing. The timing immediately caught my attention. I asked whether Diane knew about those updates. Edward said he had no reason to believe she did. When I left his office that afternoon, my thoughts returned to a conversation I had nearly forgotten. A few months earlier, Dad and I were driving home from lunch when he pointed toward an old oak tree near the edge of his property. He told me that strong roots mattered more than visible branches because roots determined what survived difficult seasons. At the time, I thought he was talking about family values. Now I wondered whether he had been speaking more broadly about preparation, trust, and responsibility. That evening, another unexpected development occurred. Michael Sullivan called and informed me that Diane's attorney had submitted additional requests related to the lawsuit. None of the requests seemed connected to the vehicle itself. Instead, they focused on obtaining access to records surrounding Dad's financial affairs. Michael sounded puzzled. So was I? If Diane truly believed the dispute centered on the Cadillac, why was she pushing so aggressively toward unrelated documents? The question lingered in my mind long after the call ended. I sat quietly in my living room, reviewing everything I had learned during the past few days. The pieces were beginning to connect. Diane had been searching for something long before Dad passed away. She had continued searching after the funeral, and now she appeared willing to use the lawsuit as another path toward the same goal. What I still did not know was whether she was chasing a rumor, a clue, or a secret she believed she was entitled to uncover. Over the next several days, I stopped looking at the situation as a disagreement between sisters and started examining it the way Dad would have examined a complicated problem. He always believed that motives mattered more than words. People could say almost anything, but their actions usually revealed the truth. The more I reviewed everything that had happened, the clearer Diane's actions became. She was not behaving like someone who wanted a sentimental family heirloom. She was behaving like someone searching for information. One afternoon, I pulled out several old boxes from my hall closet. They contained letters, photographs, holiday cards, and miscellaneous documents Dad had given me over the years. I was not expecting to find anything important. I simply wanted to revisit old memories. Hours passed as I sorted through the contents. Then I discovered a notebook I had completely forgotten about. It was one of Dad's personal journals. Most entries described ordinary events: lunch with friends, home improvement projects, travel plans, but several pages contained observations about financial planning. Dad never listed account numbers or specific balances. He was far too careful for that. Instead, he wrote about principles. One sentence immediately caught my attention. He wrote that true wealth was not measured by what people could see, but by what remained protected when circumstances changed. Another entry mentioned the importance of selecting beneficiaries based on responsibility rather than expectation. I sat quietly reading those pages long into the evening. The words sounded exactly like him. Practical, thoughtful, deliberate. The next morning, Michael called with another update. Diane's legal team had expanded their requests again. This time they were asking questions that reached even further into Dad's financial history. Michael sounded increasingly convinced that the vehicle itself was secondary. I agreed. Then he told me something unexpected. During a recent conversation, one of Diane's representatives had referenced an old rumor involving hidden investments. The phrase immediately captured my attention. Hidden investments? Suddenly everything made more sense. Perhaps Diane had heard fragments of information years ago. Perhaps she had seen a document she did not fully understand. Perhaps she had spent months trying to confirm a suspicion. Whatever the source, she appeared convinced that Dad had left behind something larger than anyone realized. That evening I met with Edward again. Together we reviewed additional records connected to the accounts Michael had mentioned. The documents revealed a remarkable story of patience and discipline. Dad had invested consistently for years. Market fluctuations came and went. Economic conditions changed, yet he remained focused on long-term growth. The result was far more significant than I had imagined when Michael first mentioned separate assets. As Edward explained the history of the accounts, I felt a mixture of admiration and sadness. Admiration for Dad's foresight. Sadness because he was no longer here to explain his decisions personally. Before I left, Edward asked a question that lingered in my thoughts all the way home. He wondered whether Diane actually knew what she was looking for, or whether she was simply chasing a rumor that had grown larger in her imagination over time. I did not know the answer, but later that night, as I reviewed the latest documents, I noticed a date that appeared repeatedly throughout the records. It corresponded to a meeting Dad attended several years earlier, a meeting that seemed to have changed everything. And for the first time, I began to suspect that whatever happened during that meeting might explain why Dad made the choices that were now reshaping all of our lives. The repeated date continued bothering me long after I first noticed it. Over the next 2 days, I reviewed every document Edward had provided, looking for a connection. Eventually, I found it. The date matched a private planning meeting Dad attended with both Edward and Michael several years earlier. According to the notes, the purpose of the meeting had been estate preservation and beneficiary review. That alone was not unusual. What was unusual was what happened afterward. Within months of that meeting, Dad reorganized several assets, updated beneficiary designations, and created instructions that would only become effective after his passing. The timing was too precise to ignore. I asked Michael whether he remembered anything specific about that meeting. He thought for a moment before answering. Then he said something that immediately caught my attention. Dad had spent most of the discussion talking about responsibility rather than money. He was less concerned with who wanted assets and more concerned with who would manage them wisely. Hearing that brought back another memory. About a year before he passed away, Dad invited me to lunch at a small diner he loved on the edge of town. We spent nearly 2 hours talking. At one point, he asked whether I had ever considered downsizing my house. I laughed and told him I was too attached to it. He smiled and said attachment was natural, but decisions should always be based on long-term stability. At the time, it felt like an ordinary conversation. Looking back, I realized he had been evaluating how I approached important decisions. The more I reflected on those moments, the more I understood that Dad had been observing all of us for years. Not judging, observing, learning who we had become. Meanwhile, Diane's behavior grew even more intense. Michael informed me that her legal team had requested expedited timelines wherever possible. They seemed eager to move the case forward before certain financial reviews were completed. That detail immediately raised concerns. Why rush? If the lawsuit truly centered on a family heirloom, there was no reason for such urgency. The pressure suggested something else entirely. Later that week, another piece of information surfaced. Through one of Dad's longtime friends, I learned that Diane had been asking questions shortly after attending a family gathering nearly 3 years earlier. During that event, someone had casually mentioned that Dad was an exceptionally successful investor. Apparently, the comment stayed with her. According to the friend, Diane became curious and began asking whether Dad maintained accounts that family members knew nothing about. Suddenly, a possible explanation emerged. Perhaps Diane had spent years building a theory. Perhaps she believed hidden wealth existed and had convinced herself she deserved to find it. If that was true, the lawsuit made more sense. It was not about winning a vehicle. It was about gaining leverage and access. That evening, I spread every document across my dining room table and studied the timeline from beginning to end. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Diane's search had started years earlier. It intensified after Dad updated his plans. It accelerated after his passing, and now it had reached the courtroom. Yet despite all her effort, one fact remained unchanged. She still did not know what Dad had actually done. As I gathered the papers and prepared to put them away, my phone rang. It was Edward. His voice sounded unusually serious. He told me he had just uncovered an additional file connected to the accounts. A file that explained not only what Dad left behind, but why he chose the beneficiary he did. The following afternoon, I met Edward at his office. The additional file he mentioned was already waiting on the conference table when I arrived. Unlike the other documents, this one was not filled with financial summaries or account histories. It contained personal notes prepared by Dad and stored alongside his estate planning records. Edward explained that the file had remained sealed because Dad instructed that it only be reviewed if questions arose regarding his decisions. As soon as I heard that, I knew I needed to read every page carefully. The first note was dated several years earlier. Dad wrote about the importance of stewardship. He believed wealth carried responsibility and that financial resources should be managed by the person most likely to preserve them rather than consume them. The next note described his concerns about family conflict. He never mentioned Diane by name, but I could feel his worry between the lines. He feared that assumptions about inheritance would eventually create resentment. What affected me most was how thoughtful his words sounded. There was no anger, no criticism, only concern and careful reasoning. Then I reached a page that changed everything. Dad described a series of conversations he had with family members over several years. He observed how different people reacted whenever financial matters were discussed. Some focused on memories, others focused on value. He wrote that character often revealed itself when people believed an opportunity was within reach. I sat silently reading those sentences while Edward waited across the room. Suddenly, dozens of small moments from the past returned to me. Casual comments, questions about assets, discussions that seemed harmless. At the time, Dad had been paying attention to all of it. Near the end of the file, I found a letter addressed directly to the person receiving the protected accounts. My hands trembled slightly as I turned the page. The letter explained that the accounts were never intended to reward someone for being a favorite child. Instead, they were intended to preserve a lifetime of work. Dad wrote that trust should be earned through judgment, patience, and consistency. Reading those words brought tears to my eyes. Not because of the money, because I finally understood his reasoning. For weeks I had been trying to solve a financial mystery. What I discovered was something much more personal. Dad had made his decision long before anyone realized it. He had spent years evaluating who would carry his legacy responsibly. After the meeting, I drove home feeling strangely calm. For the first time since the lawsuit began, I no longer felt confused. The pieces finally fit together. Yet while my questions about Dad's choices had been answered, another problem remained. Diane was still pursuing the case aggressively. In fact, according to Michael, her confidence appeared stronger than ever. Several days later, we attended a preliminary legal conference. It was not a trial, merely an administrative proceeding to address scheduling and document issues. Diane arrived early. She appeared relaxed and self-assured. Watching her from across the room, I sensed that she believed events were moving exactly as she hoped. She exchanged quiet conversations with her attorney and occasionally glanced in my direction. I remained silent. There was no reason to argue. The documents Dad left behind would eventually speak for themselves. As the meeting concluded, Michael leaned toward me and quietly shared an update. Certain records would soon become part of the official proceedings. Once that happened, information that had remained hidden for years would enter the public record. I looked across the room at Diane. She still appeared completely confident. And in that moment I realized she had absolutely no idea what was about to be revealed. The weeks leading up to the formal hearing passed more quickly than I expected. During that time, Michael and Edward worked carefully to prepare the records that would eventually be presented. I followed their guidance and stayed focused on facts rather than emotions. That was not always easy. Diane continued acting as though victory was inevitable. Through attorneys and procedural filings, she pushed forward with remarkable confidence. The more certain she seemed, the more curious I became. I kept asking myself the same question. What exactly did she think she was going to find? The answer finally arrived on the morning of the hearing. The courtroom was smaller than most people imagine. There were no dramatic speeches and no shocking interruptions. Just documents, testimony, and a process designed to establish facts. Diane sat several rows away with her attorney. She appeared calm, almost pleased. As proceedings began, the discussion focused on the dispute that had started everything. The vehicle, ownership records were reviewed. Prior communications were examined. Then Michael requested permission to introduce additional estate documents that had become relevant to understanding the broader context of the dispute. I watched Diane's expression carefully. At first, she seemed unconcerned. She probably assumed the documents would support her position. Instead, the first records established the existence of financial arrangements that had been maintained separately for years. The courtroom grew noticeably quieter. More documents followed. Dates, signatures, planning records, beneficiary designations. Everything matched what Michael and Edward had already shown me. There was nothing sensational about the information. It was simply thorough, yet the effect was impossible to ignore. For the first time since this entire process began, Diane looked genuinely surprised. As the evidence continued, the scope of Dad's planning became clear. The accounts represented decades of disciplined investing and careful management. They had not appeared suddenly. They had grown steadily over time through patience and consistency. Most importantly, the records confirmed exactly who Dad selected to receive them. I could feel every eye in the room shift as the significance of the documents became apparent. The inheritance Diane had spent years searching for was real. The protected accounts existed. The rumors she had apparently chased for so long were based on truth. But the outcome she expected never arrived. Dad's instructions were unmistakable. His decisions had been documented repeatedly and reviewed by professionals over many years. Nothing about the arrangement was accidental. Nothing was unclear. As the final records were presented, I thought about the letter Dad left behind. His words echoed in my mind. Responsibility, judgment, consistency. Those principles mattered more to him than numbers on a financial statement. The value of the accounts was significant, but the reasoning behind them carried even greater weight. By the end of the hearing, the atmosphere in the room felt completely different from when it began. Questions that had lingered for months were finally answered. Assumptions gave way to facts. Rumors gave way to documentation. For a long moment, Diane sat silently reviewing papers in front of her. The confidence she had carried into the courtroom seemed to disappear. And as everyone began gathering their files, I realized something unexpected. The most important revelation was not how much Dad had left behind. It was discovering why he believed the inheritance needed to be protected in the first place. In the days that followed, life became noticeably quieter. The legal process continued through its remaining steps, but the uncertainty that had dominated so many months was finally gone. Facts had replaced speculation. Documents had replaced rumors. For the first time since Dad passed away, I felt as though I could focus on remembering him instead of trying to understand what was happening around me. One afternoon, I drove to the storage facility where the Cadillac had been kept. The car looked exactly as I remembered. Its polished finish reflected the afternoon sunlight, and for a moment I could almost picture Dad standing beside it with the same proud smile he wore in old photographs. I opened the driver's door and sat inside without starting the engine. The familiar scent of leather immediately brought back memories of family trips, holiday visits, and long conversations during quiet drives. That was when I realized something important. The car had never been the true source of the conflict. It had simply become a symbol. Different people saw different things when they looked at it. I saw memories. Diane saw opportunity. Dad saw responsibility. A few weeks later, I made a decision that surprised several friends. I sold the vehicle to a collector who specialized in preserving classic American automobiles. The transaction was straightforward, and the buyer promised to maintain it carefully. Some people asked why I did not keep it. The answer was simple. I wanted the memories, not the object. Dad's legacy had never been contained within a machine. It existed in the lessons he left behind. As time passed, I also began reviewing the financial responsibilities that now rested with me. The accounts Dad protected for so many years represented far more than money. They represented trust. Every document I reviewed reinforced the same message. He wanted the resources he spent a lifetime building to remain secure and productive long after he was gone. I approached that responsibility with gratitude and humility. Occasionally, I thought about Diane. Our relationship changed permanently after everything that happened. We spoke rarely. When we did communicate, the conversations remained polite but distant. There was no dramatic confrontation and no emotional reconciliation. Sometimes real life does not provide those moments. Instead, it provides clarity, and clarity can be enough. Looking back, I believe Dad understood something that took me much longer to learn. Wealth has a way of revealing priorities. It does not create character. It exposes it. The events that followed his passing showed each of us who we truly were when faced with difficult choices. In the end, the most valuable thing I inherited was not an account balance or a collection of investments. It was perspective. Dad taught me that patience often uncovers truths that pressure cannot. He taught me that preparation matters more than appearances. Most importantly, he taught me that trust is earned slowly through years of consistent actions. On the anniversary of his passing, I visited his favorite park and sat beside the lake where he often spent quiet afternoons. The water moved gently across the surface, reflecting the evening sky. As I watched the sunset, I thought about everything that had happened since he left us. The legal filings, the rumors, the hidden accounts, the courtroom revelations. None of those things defined his legacy. What defined it was the wisdom behind every decision he made. And as I sat there listening to the wind move through the trees, I finally understood that the greatest inheritance my father left me was not financial security. It was the ability to recognize the difference between value and